Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, today we are going on a seriously fascinating journey that crosses centuries and scientific disciplines. We're going to start way back in the grand aristocratic halls of 18th century Europe, exploring the strict architectural beauty of classical music. And then we're traveling all the way into the modern human brain to see exactly how these historic compositions physically alter our neural pathways today. It's this brilliant collision of art, history, and neuroscience.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're covering defining the classical era, the big three composers, the forgotten female composers, gender bias in music, and finally, your brain on classical music. We're going way beyond a standard history lesson today, for sure. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, defining the classical era. To really get this music, you kind of have to understand what it was reacting against. By the 1750s, artists they were just tired of the heavy, over-the-top opulence of the Baroque period. They wanted clean, uncluttered styles. The classical era sits right there in history between 1750 and 1820. But, these dates are pretty fluid. The real driving force behind this clean, tuneful sound, it wasn't a calendar year. It was actually the shifting tastes of wealthy, aristocratic patrons who just wanted music that was beautifully, perfectly structured. So, to give those patrons the clean structure they craved, composers leaned on very specific forms. And the absolute biggest one, sonata form. Think of it as the architectural foundation of the entire classical era. It demands strict, perfect balance across three distinct sections. First, an exposition to introduce the themes. Then, a development section to explore them. And finally, a recapitulation to resolve it all. It is literally a masterclass in tension and release. It's actually a lot like the 3-act structure of your favorite movie. It gave composers this predictable yet infinitely variable blueprint for building a symphony. Moving right along to Section 2, the big three composers. We can see a rapid evolution of musical style across just a few generations here. First, we have Johann Sebastian Bach. He's the absolute master of the Baroque, completely famous for his intricate, meticulous 4-part harmonies and daring modulations. Then, right after him comes Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He is the quintessential classical genius. He took those Baroque sensibilities and basically smoothed them out into these incredibly balanced, transparent, but still complex masterpieces like the Magic Flute. And finally, Ludwig van Beethoven. He started out in the classical tradition, but totally pushed it into the Romantic era with a versatile, incredibly dramatic, and heroic style. I mean, just think of his monumental Fifth Symphony. And naturally, this massive, heroic new music demanded an instrument that could actually project it. By 1825, the modern orchestra was pretty much fully assembled. This era cemented that grand symphonic sound we all recognize today. It standardized the sections, bringing in modern flutes, clarinets, French horns, and valve trumpets. The tools for massive, complex musical storytelling were literally all in place. Which brings us to a really critical pivot. Section 3, the forgotten female composers. Interestingly enough, it was technology that provided an unexpected opening here. The invention and the massive popularization of the pianoforte around 1750 really changed the landscape. It was versatile, it could stand alone, and crucially, it became socially acceptable for young women to play in the home. And this domestic acceptability, it inadvertently handed women an incredibly powerful medium for composition, particularly for writing the Lied, which was a super popular German art song designed for solo voice and piano. But just having access to an instrument absolutely didn't equal freedom. Clara Wieck Schumann was one of the most brilliant musicians of her entire generation, but she wrote this absolutely heartbreaking entry in her diary. She wrote, "A woman must not desire to compose, to believe that would be arrogant." Despite her massive talent, societal views basically dictated that her only duty was to her home, her children, and her husband. Having a professional, public career as a composer was viewed as completely inappropriate. So let's look at how two different composers navigated these massive constraints. Take Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel. She composed over 300 songs, but her own father and brother expressly forbade her to publish them, claiming it flat out contradicted her duties as a woman. Now contrast her with Louise Reichardt. She carved out a totally different path by choosing to remain single. By doing that, she completely avoided traditional household duties, which allowed her to successfully publish hundreds of Lieder and actually support herself by running her own vocal studio. It's two completely different ways of navigating the exact same societal barrier. And this brilliantly illustrates our next point, Section 4, Gender Bias in Music. You see, these societal constraints actually seeped right into the academic study of music itself. Historically, music theory baked gender biases directly into its fundamental terminology. Take a cadence, which is essentially just the end of a musical phrase. It was defined based entirely on where the beat landed. If the final chord landed on a strong beat, theorists officially termed it a masculine cadence. But if it ended on a weak beat, it was called a feminine cadence. This terminology perfectly and, impartially speaking very clearly, mirrored the 18th century worldview of the people who created it. And this lens extended all the way to the foundational structures we were talking about earlier. Remember the sonata form? Well, historically, theorists analyzed it through this exact same gendered lens. The first theme of the exposition was frequently categorized as strong, energetic, and therefore masculine. Then the secondary theme was described as tender, flexible, and feminine. By attributing the core driving forces of standard classical music to masculine traits, the historical establishment essentially perpetuated this stereotype of the composer as a uniquely, exclusively male creative mind.
All right, bringing us to our final topic, Section 5, Your Brain on Classical Music.
When we're exposed to classical music, the clinical benefits are just profound. Studies actually show it directly enhances spatial reasoning, which is the exact kind of logic you need for math and science. So hey, next time you need a study, seriously consider putting on some Mozart, because it improves both short and long-term memory, especially verbal memory. The calming, highly organized nature of the music significantly boosts your attention and focus. It aids in language development, and it acts as a really powerful tool for emotional regulation, helping to reduce stress and anxiety.
So, here's the crucial point. It's not magic. It's architecture. The very structures we explored at the beginning of this explainer, Bach's meticulous modulations, Mozart's balanced tension, the strict mathematical architecture of the sonata form, these are the exact stimuli that trigger advanced neural pathways in the brain. The structural complexity of classical music literally forces the human brain to process spatial relationships and linguistic patterns on a deeply physical level.
Which brings us to a really fascinating final thought to wrap up our explainer today. We now know, thanks to clinical science, the incredible power this highly structured music has to expand human cognition. Yet, as we've just seen, historical constraints and societal biases systematically silenced countless female creators, severely limiting the volume of this incredible art form. So, I'll leave you with this. If history silenced the female Mozarts and Beethovens, if half the population was barred from contributing their genius to this cognitive toolkit, what other masterpieces and what other brilliant minds have we entirely missed out on? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.